Okay. All right, Evelyn.
Okay, well, welcome everybody. This is the latest and greatest lectures in our lecture series from Friends of Calligraphy. And it's also the new year. So happy new year, everybody. And I hope that 2024 is a wonderful, productive, creative, and peaceful new year for all of you. I would like to introduce Joanna Homrighausen. I've known Joanna, I thought since they were a teenager, but it turns out Joanna was a very young graduate student when I first met her back a long time ago in Sarah Frank's class. Excuse me, I'm getting over a cold. Joanna is a scholar and writer at the intersection of sacred texts, lettering arts, and scribal crafts. By day, an academic in the study of religion at Duke University, she has taught at William and Mary since 2021. Is that correct, Joanna?
Yes.
Okay. In the calligraphy world, she is best known as editor of Scripsit, the Journal of the Washington Calligraphers Guild, and the author of 2 books on the St. John's Bible, Planting Letters and Weaving Lines, which was published in 2022, and Illuminating Justice, which was published in 2018. In 2021, during the lockdown, she curated a virtual exhibit, Visual Music, Calligraphy and Sacred Texts, for the Henry Luce III Center for the Arts and Religion at Wesley Theological Seminary. Her current project, Sensory Letters, examines the lettering arts and wooden sculptures of Martin Wenham, and she will begin a book series on sacred texts and religious themes and calligraphy and lettering arts with Cascade Books. So here is Joanna.
Okay, thank you. Before I share my screen, can you see me okay? All right.
Yes, we can see it fine.
Oh, I see myself. Amazing. After 3 years on Zoom, they have not yet made Zoom able to show our best angles. Right, technology. So I wanted to start not with my face, but with this, because something I like to do when I'm writing about an artist or sort of looking into their work, I like to put their stuff on my walls in my home office. So when I was writing my St. John's Bible stuff, I had a big thing on the wall in here, and you just sort of look at it, day in, day out. It gives you some certain energy. Right now, my walls are a lot of Ben Shahn, but that's a topic for another day. But this is the one Martin Wenham piece that I bought. And when I say this is lettering on wood, this is not typically wood that, is all uniform and pretty and perfect from the lumber yard. Martin Wenham lives pretty close to the ocean in Wales, and stuff washes up on shore. So it's wood with a history. It's wood that might often just make its way into the junk pile. And so this one, for example, because I'm showing you a lot of images today, and I want you to realize these are three-dimensional objects. You can touch them. So this is a piece of wood from a shipwreck, and just to give you a sense of how rough it is, on the back there are all these little red leather patches, and it says, "Do not remove the red patches. They cover sawn-off nails." So, Martin Wenham. Also, in the course of our conversation today, we'll have time for Q&A at the end. With you can unmute and give some audio, comment, question, rant, ramble, diatribe, or but also during the talk, I like to do this. I started this more when I was working with the St. John's Bible. I like to just pause and say, put what you see in the chat. Give you a moment to look at the images and just before I start telling you what I think, which you could love or you could ignore. You could look at the images yourselves before I give you my commentary. So I totally invite that feedback in the chat, and I will be trying to monitor it. But especially when I say, stop for a moment and type what you see in the chat, I'll definitely be checking the chat then. And I'd really obviously love to thank Friends of Calligraphy for inviting me to come here, to Evelyn and to Elena and everybody for making this happen. This crazy thing called Zoom that has made the calligraphy world so small, where we can all be on Zoom together all the time. And even though, thank God, the total lockdown is long behind us, we still have this beautiful way of connecting. So I'm going to start my screen share and hope that this works the way I want it to. Ah, brilliant. Okay, let me just sort of move my windows around, get everything in order, and you can, get a sketch pad. If you're anything like me and you're listening to a talk on Zoom, you're either folding laundry or you're doodling letters on a sketch pad with a parallel pen. So whatever you need to do, I am really grateful to be here today and grateful that you are here. So yes, as noted in the introduction, I got my start in the world of calligraphy as a scholar of religion, mostly the Bible, but sort of the world around it as well, and the world of people who've engaged with it for the last 2,000 odd years. So naturally, of course, it was the St. John's Bible. I was starting my master's degree, and I was working as a student assistant in my university library at Santa Clara University, and we had one of the heritage editions. And my boss said, "Can you learn a little spiel about this so when people come in, you could say something intelligent and tell them what it is?" And here we are. So be careful what rabbit holes you go down. This is the life lesson for today. And so through that project, I wrote these two books. The first one more about the images, and the second one more about the calligraphy, in part because what I noticed as I showed the St. John's Bible over and over, and we're getting to Martin Wenham, don't worry. What I noticed is people don't always know how to look at calligraphy and lettering. I mean, in this room, obviously we do, because we're all world experts. But what I noticed when I showed the St. John's Bible, people would have a lot to say about the images, a lot of responses, a lot of nuance and depth, and they just loved to dwell with them. And they'd look at the lettering and say, "Wow, it's pretty." And I think we know that there's more to lettering calligraphy than just, "Oh, it's pretty," because a calligrapher plays with letters in ways much more complicated and sophisticated and nuanced than that, even if they are pretty. Although I've also seen calligraphers try to make something intentionally not pretty, or pretty in a way that's a little hard to access. And that too is an aesthetic choice, that too communicates something. So my way to Martin Wenham was really through the second book, where I was looking a lot at how do we look at calligraphy as an art form. So I had a lot of weird stuff, fun stuff, like the page is a garden and every line of text is like an ox plowing a line in a field. And I didn't make up these metaphors. Medieval European scribes knew them pretty well, wrote about them. I just brought them into the St. John's Bible and used them to explain, if a page is like a garden, every letter is like a flower. And in a garden, you might have a whole row of roses, and they're all roses. They all sort of go together, but none of them are the same. And that's its own kind of beauty. And that's, of course, part of how calligraphy works too, right? No, you can have 20 S's on the page and none of them will be perfectly identical. And that's what makes it its own kind of beauty. And that's what makes it hand done rather than typography. So from there, I got into this exhibit, visual music, because like so many of us going stir crazy during lockdown, I thought, why not? This looks fun. And I just want to give a note. I am a scholar of religion. The way that I looked at works in this exhibit, the way that I'm going to talk about Martin Wenham's work today, you will certainly find plenty of artists who consider themselves religious artists who would say that they're making art for a religious tradition or within a religious tradition. And that's not the tone that I'm going for today. I see these sacred texts as conversations that anyone can jump into. These are human reflection, like art, like poetry, like music. And so I hope none of you feel maybe off put by the fact that part of a lot of what I'll be looking at today is calligraphy, lettering art that's dealing with religious texts. In part, that's what I know. And so that's sort of the background I come into it with. But I will point out many of the artists who worked on the St. John's Bible wouldn't describe themselves as regular churchgoers. And yet the text they were given to engage with, they found beautiful things in them to work with and play with. People like Thomas Ingmeyer or Suzanne Moore. And I just named them because they're people I've talked to firsthand about their work on the Bible. So, let's see, how are we on time? My mouse is all over the place. Uh-oh, come on. There we go. So a little bit about Martin Wenham, and I encountered his work through the Visual Music Project. I just did a lot of Googling. I did a lot of looking through Calligraphy News Guild journals, newsletters, just looking for interesting stuff. And everyone in the exhibit, there were 15 pieces by 15 artists, and everyone in that was living. I wanted to convey that calligraphy is a living thing. And sadly, since 2021, two of the artists in the exhibit are no longer with us, Sheila Waters and Peter Halliday. So I feel very grateful that I was able to get their work in. But Martin Wenham is very much here. He's actually on the call and says he's happy during Q&A to answer questions. So a little bit about him. He was born in 1941 and definitely most known for letter carving in wood. My experience when I explain this project to people in calligraphy world, especially on the state side, people haven't always heard of his work. I think this is not a reflection on his skill. I think this is a reflection on the fact that he did not make a living as a full-time calligrapher, traveling the guild circuit, giving workshops and teaching the way that someone like Donald Jackson did. But he's been doing lettering since the 60s. And in addition to all of his calligraphy and the gallery exhibitions he's had in the last 20 years, especially, he had a whole career in education. So starting with a PhD in botany, tree science especially, which that'll come back, then going into primary education, secondary education, and then ending his academic formal career as a lecturer in primary education at the University of Leicester. So, and as somebody who thought about education a lot of his work was on art and science and how the two are connected. And that's a lot of what we'll be looking at today. How is calligraphy, how is lettering a kind of experiment? Uh-oh. I have 3 dogs and they're all in the next room and I hear one of them barking. I hope you do not. Does anyone hear my dog barking? Okay, good. It's just gonna annoy me then. So in the visual music exhibit, this was the piece that I included, the Martin Wenham Magnificat. And when I showed people the virtual exhibit, many people said this was the piece that just really blew them away. It stood out the most, the colors, the 3-dimensional nature of it. So what do you see here? Just a few words. You can put it in the chat. Please stay muted, but put in the chat if you want. What do you see here? What stands out to you? Joy, movement. Yes, a lot of movement. Blue like water, wonder. I think blue like water is fitting given how many of the wood pieces he works with washed up from the ocean. Luminosity, letters breathing, size. Yeah, this thing is taller than me, a good foot taller than me. So yeah, it's imposing. And I don't remember, somebody said it looked like a skateboard. So this is the Magnificat. This is in the Gospel of Luke in the Christian New Testament. This is the song that Mary, the mother of Jesus, sings when she finds out that she is pregnant with this very special child. And what I find interesting, the word Magnificat literally means magnifies. And here it's almost like the letters are under a magnifying glass. and they're bright, they're vibrant, and they're singing, which is another important part of Martin Wenham's work. When I described the lettering as visual music, it's not just a nice metaphor. Often when Martin is lettering a phrase or a verse that he finds meaningful, he's not just thinking of the words, he's thinking of a musical setting of it that he loves. So here he's listening to Claudio Monteverdi's setting of the Magnificat as he's lettering the Magnificat in these vibrant, colorful letters. And I showed this once, and somebody said it looks like graffiti, which this is an interesting sidebar because right now we're working on the spring script set to the Washington Calligraphers Guild, and the theme will be graffiti. Okay, let's see. So to get a sense of how Martin works, he does do things on paper, but the thing that what he's probably most known for is letter carving. So he draws the letters on the wood, he carves them out. And these videos, by the way, you can find videos about his work from Goldmark Gallery. They represent him. They're in the UK, and they have, I think it's on Vimeo, not YouTube, but Vimeo, another video site with just short videos about his work, him talking about his work. And if you're curious to dig in more, he's done 3 major exhibits there, each of which had a catalog accompanying it, language visible, silent voices, and the most recent look that you may hear me. So a lot of what I am talking about today, a lot of the information I have about his work comes from these. And if you really want to do the deep dive, most recently, his book, The Art of Letter Carving in Wood, which has sort of, as he says, this is the book I wish I had 50 years ago when I was first starting. In terms of inspirations, he says Eric Gill and David Jones. I misspelled Jones. Okay, Eric Gill and David Jones, sort of the main inspirations. And I think David Jones especially, you'll start to see as we look into his work more, how he's an inspiration. So after he carves, he will often paint the letters in. And often I like this also because you can really see the texture of the wood. He wants you to know that each piece of wood he works with has had a life. It isn't something perfect and uniform from the lumber yard. He wants to leave in the roughness, the grain, sometimes the broken off nails, or the sawed off nails. So what I'd like to talk about today regarding his work is the idea of art and science, the idea of observation and experimentation that underlies both of those. So we'll be looking at 3 phrases that he's lettered multiple times and how he captures different aspects of those phrases in different pieces, sometimes made decades apart. Much like reading a novel again, you read it when you're 20 and you reread it when you're 60, and you'll have different wisdom. I moved schools a bit when I was a kid, and I remember in 8th grade, we read To Kill a Mockingbird, and I thought, this is boring, because I was 13. I'm not going to defend my 13-year-old brain. And then I read it again in 9th grade when I went to a different school, and it was amazing and it was beautiful, and I suddenly got it, and it was a powerful book. So, imagine that's 1 year apart. Imagine decades apart. Okay, so the first phrase I'd like to start with, this is one that he's returned to again and again. Hallelujah, from the heart of God and from the hand of the artist, inimitable. And I'll tell you what this phrase is from in a moment. It's not from the Bible. But what do you see here? My dog is still barking. Living words, movement. Yeah, honor for the wood grain. That's a good one, Ann Miller. The letter, yes. Yeah, you're picking up on, I see a lot of people picking up on the layout and on the way he works with the wood. So this is actually from a poem by the English poet Christopher Smart. This was a very long poem called Jubilate Agno, written in between 1758 and 1763, when he was confined to what in those days they would have called a madhouse. And this was I think something like 1200 verse poem. That's a lot of it is this praise for God, but it's very much full. It's full of um, symbolism and allusions that are not obvious to the reader. It's sort of poetry with footnotes. And this line, let David bless with the bear, because there's a little bit biblically about how David beat up a bear defending his flocks, shepherds, right? The beginning of victory to the Lord, the perfection of excellence. Hallelujah from the heart of God and from the hand of the artist inimitable, and from the echo of the heavenly harp in sweetness, magnifical and mighty. And Martin here is not only thinking of the poem, but of Benjamin Britten's setting of it, which I'm not going to sing for you. I'm sorry, but you could find on YouTube, I'm sure. So here you see some of Martin's style. Yes, he's very much lettering in the context of the wood. He's working around the knots, almost as if I think of the knots as like kind of a heart in the tree grain. This is just me speaking. And like the tree has its own beating heart. And we're reminded of the hand of the artist because we're seeing the traces of the hand. Like we calligraphers love to do things playing with the idea of something being by hand. We see that in the wood itself. We also see a little bit of what we'll see a lot more of later, the orality, the musicality, the rhythm of the words, that when you say this phrase, hallelujah stands out. And so he's sort of feeling out the shape, the interiority of the words, just like a musician would sing a line. But this is, I will call this early Martin Wenham, because the letter forms are still a bit more staid, a bit more formal, a little closer to type than what they'll become later. And this is sort of in the 80s and 90s, especially. So then he returns to this in 2008, a totally different aesthetic of lettering. What do you see here? How does it feel different to you? It grows. Oh, I like that. I like that, Margaret Morgan. I'm going to say everyone's last name because now that there's two Carols, like who else might there be two of? Creating fabric, harmony and integration. Oh, green roots. I hadn't even thought about that. There's red and there's red iron oxide and chromium oxide green here. A little harder for me to see. I'm kind of colorblind. So this is like quite a handicap in my line of work. Yes, Martin found his voice between piece one and piece two. That's someone saying in the chat. I'll let Martin respond to that when we get to Q&A. Maybe he'd agree. Yes, it's a very different feel. The letters here, the design is much more bespoke to the letters. The letters are intermingled. They're all over each other. He's varying the forms. See the D's in and hand are majuscule when they're surrounded by these minuscule letters. It's not only, we've got the words hallelujah and God in all majuscules, all caps, because these are the most emphasized. The varying volumes, there's a kind of cadence to it. And what I like about this also is the grain. If we think of, I often think of letters and words close together, it's like the volumes turned up. And he chose the part of the wood that had the most grain to sort of turn up the volume even more, like it's background accompaniment, like there's an orchestra there. So the texture is different, the texture of the letter forms. The unwritten space echoes a horizon. I like that. That's a good one. I'm gonna have to save this chat. Some of you are giving me some pretty good ideas. This is the great thing about when you haven't published the book yet and you're talking about it. Now, when I talk about the St. John's Bible, people say something smart, and I say, please don't say that, because the book's out there. I can't add what you just said. So I don't want to hear, I don't want to learn anything more. That was a joke. Okay. And then a third one here on paper. Here, the textures of the background, to me, suggest winds, waters, almost like the primal chaos of creation, and the chaos and energy, not just of divine creation, but artistic creation. When you're in the moment, you're in the flow, and the ideas are just bubbling and sparking through your head. And to me, that is what's going on in the background here, and that is what the spiritual experience that you could relate this to, whether or not you connect to any of the religious language in particular. And also, just to add about the music, because this phrase is taken from a verse evoking the harp, David's traditional, the traditional idea that David wrote the Psalms, and the fact that in the biblical narrative he does play the music to calm Saul down. So the musicality is, if not in this phrase, it's in the full verse, and it's a way of praise. What's the date on this paper piece? I'm not quite sure, but I'm guessing this is probably close to the last one, which was 2018, simply because it's a very similar design, and whatever was going on with this particular layout, this design of the Hallelujah, which I'm guessing there are a lot of pencil sketches laying behind these two finished pieces. Whatever it was, there's something there that Martin wanted to return to again and again. So I pulled from this article from his academic days. This is an article in the Philosophy of Education that he wrote, Art and Science and Education, the Common Ground. And he's showing how art and science often rely on very similar skills, which I think now we're maybe a lot more familiar with. We talk about STEAM and the value of the arts for so-called useful, scientific engineering kind of education as well. I'm putting useful in scare quotes. Do not leave this talk and think that I just said art is useless. So Martin Wenham writes, observation is basic to much work in both art and science. We could think of it as a complex investigative process, which is dependent on the ability to select from the enormous range of visual stimuli that we could see at any moment. Investigations in both art and science often require making observations and recording them by drawing in words or a combination of the two. And so here I think about Leonardo da Vinci's sketchbooks. I think about Charles Darwin sketching beaks of different kinds of birds while he's traveling. These are the kinds of observations that led to a scientific development, because people just saw something out in the world and noticed it and said, that's interesting. Let's start to catalog these observations. So similarly with a word or a phrase, the more you do it, the more you come up with ideas about it. I'm someone in the comments, John Muir. Okay. There's a lot of directions we could go in. Okay. So the next one, this is another one. Oh, I was gonna do the pop quiz, but I already put the answer up here. So this phrase that he's also done several times, raise the stone and you shall find me, cleave the wood and there am I. And this is a saying of Jesus, not from the canonical books of the Christian New Testament, but from the Gospel of Thomas, a compilation of Jesus' sayings. We're not even going to get into sort of what's historical, what's not, but it's from probably the 1st, 2nd century. And some of them are quite cryptic because it's just sayings that don't always have a lot of explanation. But cryptic sayings are also, I think, great for the imagination. So the full phrase is, Jesus said, I am the light that is over all things. I am all. From me all came forth, and to me all attained. Split a piece of wood, I'm there. Lift up the stone, and you'll find me there. So I found a different translation of just what I had on my shelf, but it's the same phrase. What do you see here? It is the same piece of wood, both front and back. Mm. So the wood was not technically split open by Martin, but it's self-referential Jesus finding in a cleaved wood. Yeah, you have anything about Jesus and it's on wood, you're going to get some symbolism and interplay there because the wood, the cross, hold that thought. So this is the earlier Martin Wenham. The letters are much more formal. This is 1984, so this is before I was born. Oh God, what did I just put my foot in my mouth on that one? Uh, and so, one of the great things about working with a living artist is you can ask questions. And he emailed me. He said, I was given this oak wood. It was a lot bigger and it was decayed. And when he stripped the decayed wood away, this is the shape that emerged. But the color is actually from a fungus that decayed the outer parts. So to get this beautiful color, you actually had to have the wood sort of be attacked by this fungus and have part of it eaten away. And he says, what I was going for in this and other versions is the idea that the wood has been cleft from the tree and the stone of the base has been raised from the quarry. So they witness, these are in his words, that the creator is here and now in both a living presence. So the very materiality of it's not just playing with the musicality and the layout of the letters, it's the material he's working on. In Christian theology and the symbolism of Christianity, the wood of the cross, that is the wood of the instrument of execution, is also, in Christian belief, new life in the resurrection. The death enables new life. So that's part of it. Raise the stone, moving the stone from the tomb, have to go to the burial site in order to find the life. So the interplay of life and death. And one thing Martin Wenham really likes about working with wood is, unlike stone, it's going to rot sooner or later. And he says the wood is on its way back to the earth, on its way back to the ongoing stream of life. All he's doing is delaying the journey for a little bit so it can tell a message. So here, what I like about this and about this one also is sort of, because it's three-dimensional, because it's on each side, you have to move around. Someone asked, does he sign his name? Not that I know of on this piece. Some of these, neither of us have access to because he might have sold it off at a gallery exhibit 20 years ago. So the photos he has are the photos he has. I'm guessing that this is on a pedestal. If you look at the base, there's a pedestal. I'm guessing on the bottom of the pedestal, it is probably signed. The one that I got here, this one is signed in his own hand with a nice little note. Okay. If we go to the next one, the next time he came back to this piece in 1992, it's quite a different feel. How is this one different? What are you seeing that speaks to you? The wood is more raw looking. Yes, yes. We'll see uh, very intentional on his part. And I don't think we're not talking about any of them today, but there are pieces where he's, something from a shipwreck that has nails, and he'll just leave them in as part of the final lettering sculpture, if you want to call it that. Strength plus grace, cleave, yes. So whereas the last one, the words are kind of in this more calm, formal arrangement, and you read it from top to bottom. Here, your eyes are kind of zigzagging. You have to work a little bit to see this. Raise the stone, and you shall find me. Your eyes are going back and forth, and the one word that is cut in half is the word cleave. So he says this was actually from a very large fallen tree, and this was, as he said, as the trunk was being cut on the ground, the chainsaws had not quite cut through it in some places, and at some point the weak bits of wood were left uncut. They collapsed, literally ripping a strip of the outer wood off. So this was sort of the roughness of the chainsaw that produced this unusual shape. And he saw this and said, I'm going to make some piece out of this. And as he puts it, the message from this design, you have to be in the right place to see it. And this is part of the frustration of talking about his work on Zoom is you can't really get the three-dimensionality of the sculpture. You have to stand in one place to see it. And that there's some message there about how we have to be in the right place to have a certain insight, to have a certain understanding. Think about as creatives, certain things maybe you're not ready to see or you're not ready to dig into until you're a certain age or you've had a certain kind of life experience. And then all of a sudden things make sense. When I was 20, I had an older friend say that nobody under, you might not agree with this, but an older friend said, no man under 30 understands Jane Austen. Maybe it's true, maybe it's not. But the sentiment, I think we've all had this experience where some things you just have to be in the right place to understand. And your point of view is part of your insight. So he returns to this one again in 1997. And I think the layout is a little more formal again. And again, this one's also stained by fungus, quite pretty. But what I like about this is we see that the letters are sort of following the grain of the wood. And he's playing with the split that's in the wood itself. So there's another piece he has. It's blessed are the cracked, for they shall let in the light. Definitely playing on the Leonard Cohen song. There is a crack in everything. That's how the light gets in. And so I think there's a similar idea here that the crack is what many people would say. This is an imperfection in the wood. You don't want to use it, but it's what tells you that it's wood. It's what makes it living. It's part of what gives it beauty. The organic quality of it. And then we'll fast forward to 2022. And as you can see, the letters are totally different. What do you see in this one? You guys are so observant today. I am learning from you. It's exciting. Are these human sized? So Martin could answer that. Some of these I have the dimensions of if they're from the exhibition catalogs. This one, this one might have been something he just did in his garage and then sent me a photo. So it's not in an exhibit catalog. Um, so if that's the case, I may or may not have the dimensions, but he could answer. They seem utterly unrelated in color and background. Ah, I'm going to convince you otherwise. But this is the same piece of wood. So the first thing I notice in this, as opposed to the others, is the way he's laying out the words really plays with the structure of each phrase. So each phrase, raise the stone and you shall find me. There's an imperative, and then there's a kind of here's what'll happen. And then cleave the wood, and there am I. And so he's changing the script. He's changing the way they're laid out. The word raise, as you read it, your eyes are going up. So it's literally raising. And cleave, your eyes are going down because it's written downwards. And your eyes are going down, much like if you're cleaving a piece of wood, you hold an axe and you chop it downwards. So the layout is even evoking the physical actions associated with each of these phrases. And as when Martin Wenham wrote to me about this piece, he said, I originally intended to design this quite informally, but the words wouldn't have it. These are, after all, said to be the words of Jesus. They require the dignity of a very formal letter design. And the letters are formal, but the layout is playful. The layout has a nice shape to it. So one of you wrote in the chat that these two sides seem unrelated. And I think they're related because there's a kind of interplay between the two. So you look at the raise the stone side, and if you turn it over, you sort of raise the stone. If you do the work to reveal what's behind, the cleave the wood side to me looks like the inside of some rocks when you split them open. And then when you read cleave the wood and you sort of do the work, do the cleaving in a sense, turn it around, you see what looks like the grains of wood. That's just my take. So even here, the way that the piece is laid out, the way he treats each side, is they're sort of interplaying the two. And one of them, cleave the wood, is flat, like chopped wood. Raise the stone is curved, like a stone. And I have some more images here. You can really see, especially on the right, you can see there's a curve in it. It's not just like a half moon. There's more of a curve in this piece of wood. And I love the little bar on the top of the A. It just kind of keeps the line much more together. So one thing I also like about these, we talked a little bit about sort of the inspiration that Martin Wenham is drawing on from people like Eric Gill, from people like David Jones, of course, Edward Johnston. That was, like so many of us, the book that got him into all of this. But I think we can go much further back, because in early English art, there's a long history of talking objects. Think about Lord of the Rings, all the swords that have names. Tolkien didn't make this up. Tolkien was a medievalist, and he knew about things like the Ruthwell Cross, which now, if Ann Miller's still here, this is going to be her thing, of course. In the Ruthwell Cross, we have, this is from the 8th century, we have these runes, and in the runes are carved, if my PowerPoint will listen, there we go. One of the earliest English poems, The Dream of the Rood, which narrates the crucifixion of Jesus from the point of view of the cross. They've forsaken me to stand there, put through with piercing. That's the object itself is talking. And so I think that's part of what Martin Wenham's work is playing with. The wood has something to say, and he's drawing it out by listening to it, by looking at its shape and its grain and thinking about what kind of words would fit with this. He says, my work is very much an investigation into language, and hypothesis experiment is always at the back of what I do. To observe is to look or listen or touch with intention and often expectation as well, and then to see with understanding. So every one of these pieces working with this phrase is drawing out something different, whether it's in the layout of the script of the words, whether it's in the kind of script he shapes them into, or the way that they're laid out on the object and the object itself. And each of these brings out a different element of the phrase. Okay, we have one more phrase to look at, and then we'll open up to Q&A. But any comments or questions so far in the chat? Okay, all right. We will forge on ahead. So this last series of pieces, I think, are definitely some of the most daring and exciting ways that he's played with 3 words. This is just 3 words. I held up 2 fingers because I don't know how to count. And the phrase is surge amica mea, arise, my beloved. And this is actually from the Song of Songs. Any of you are Bible people. The Song of Songs, this is a book of love poetry from the Jewish Bible, also known as Christian Old Testament. And the love poetry, it's often read as about God and humanity, but if you just read it quite literally, it's a man and a woman. They're in love. They're singing to each other. They're trying to seduce one another. They're talking each other up about how beautiful each of them is, and then they're going to a garden, and some mischief is happening. And so here, this is one of the lines from. This is a line from one of the songs that the man sings. Arise, my beloved, my fair one, and come away. For now the winter is past, the rain is over and gone. It's springtime, people, and springtime is, the time when fertility and creation comes back to life. So, of course, a fitting time for a poem of seduction. But here, these are not on the same pedestal. So we have surge amica mea, arise, my beloved, and come away. That's what the second one says. But they're arranged differently. So here, they kind of remind me of ski lifts, but you, the viewer, the beholder, can move these around in different ways and think about the letters themselves. The pieces of wood are shaped like something jumping up in the air or something that might catapult someone else in the air, just like the words which are saying, arise, my love, and come away. What else do you see here? Restraint, like couches lifting upward. Like couches lifting upward? Okay, I'll take it. They look like legless beach chairs. Um, I I don't know if I can speak for Martin, but I'm gonna guess that his pieces are not designed to be sat on. The letters are fragmented and overlay each other. Yes, in the tradition of innuendo, the shape of the arising wood evokes the physicality of that love. Oh boy. All right. People are getting a little euphemistic in the chat. The letters intermingle. Well, yes. And one of the beautiful things about the biblical Song of Songs is the words of the lovers intermingle. Sometimes it's not clear who's speaking. So, of course, as we saw before, Martin, if there's a design he likes, he's going to return to it. And I think many of you are right on the money. The letters are intermingled, and they're hard to read. It's not only is it in Latin, so most of us can't understand it off the top of our heads, but just the physical shapes are somewhat concealed. And this is a thing many calligraphers do if they want to make you look a second time, look more closely, look for the veiled meaning of words and letters. And of course, poetry is full of things that are not immediately obvious. The Song of Songs, which looks like love poetry between humans, Jews and Christians alike have traditionally read as in a veiled way about the relationship between God and humanity. I think since many of you are in the San Francisco area, if you saw a couple of years ago Thomas Ingmeyer's exhibit at the San Francisco Public Library, he definitely does a lot of veiling words, making things not as obviously legible to make you look twice, to make you look more closely. And here, the background, and this is on paper, again, it's surging upwards. It's like water flowing up. Okay. And we do this again. This one is called Object and Image. What do you see here? The letters are fractured. Mm-hmm. Yes, it's carved in reverse on the back. Ooh, someone said it's an acorn shape. I kind of like that. I don't know if Martin was thinking that. He can tell us. Or if he's like me, he can say, I don't remember precisely what I was thinking when I did that. That might just be me, though. The breaks in letters create momentum. Ooh, I like that. That's a good one. Um, Something that I see here, the fact that he's carved it on both sides, and then on the back, it's carved in reverse, such that when you put it in the mirror, it's the call and response. It's the way that when the lovers speak to one another, one of them says, "Arise and come," and the other responds to the invitation. So there's something playful about that. And there's something intriguing to me about the significance of a mirror, that something might be even more hard to decode, but if you have the right tool, you can see it. But also that so much of what we find when we make art, when we fall in love, we see a lot, we learn a lot about ourselves. So we have to look in the mirror as well. So you could run in a lot of different directions with that. And finally, Surge Amica Mea again. This is not on paper, this is on fiberboard. But what do you see in this one? This is the last piece we'll be looking at. The chalice looks like a rose. Ooh, I like that. The blood of Christ provides the way of resurrection. Whoever drinks of the water that I shall give shall never thirst. Yes, I mean, multiple ways to look at it. I think in a very secular way, you could say this is kind of a cup as somebody offering something. But of course, it's got red in the cup and it's called chalice. And I don't know about you, but I don't use the word chalice in my day-to-day life unless I'm describing what happens in a church, especially a Catholic church or another Christian church that has a sort of strong tradition of communion or Eucharist. So of course, the word chalice, the invitation here is not just to any love, but to drink of the wine, which in Christian belief either is or symbolizes the blood of Christ. I say is or symbolizes because that's another minefield of theological differences between different Christians that we're not getting into that. But even if you don't connect to that particular imagery, the fact that he's played with word and image in this way, that he's related these words to an image that's instantly recognizable to anyone who knows the iconography, the symbolism, the visual world of a sort of liturgically traditional Christian tradition. Again, word becomes image, word and image interplay. So all these variations, which are not decades apart like the others, but much closer together in time, they're all capturing different elements of these words. We have the ski jump that looks like maybe a phallus. We have the running waters flowing up from left to right. We have the mirror image. We have the chalice. And somebody said this about 20 minutes ago, and I took note because the first person I think of is someone like Anne Heckel, who, when in my own thinking about calligraphy and the way I look at and write about calligraphy, so indebted to her because she was somebody, especially in the 80s, who was playing with the interiority of words and phrases, doing multiple variations on the same phrase to capture different aspects of it, emphasize different parts, capture different oral ways of reading or singing or chanting a phrase, and capturing that on the page. And this is another piece that I wrote about for the visual music exhibit. So yes, I'm a big Anne Heckel fan, and yeah, we could do a whole other thing on her whole aspects of language series and how she captures poetry and orality through calligraphy. So I see a lot of that with Martin Wenham's work as well. I don't know how much he specifically thinks about her, or how much he's engaged with her, but I see a strong parallel. So today I've talked a bit about Martin Wenham, about his work, and my own take on it as art that is really engaging the interiority of words, that is doing art and science together as a mode of observation. So I've been very excited to look at his work, and this summer I am hoping to go to Wales and actually meet him and in person and spend some time looking at things he's done in person other than the one on my wall. And just getting a sense of sort of the process behind them. But in the meantime, I'm very grateful for you all today. And I'm happy to open this up to Q&A. So this is all for my book and project in progress, Sensory Letters, and the series that I'm working on. And it's not just a series for me to write. It's a series is kind of a collection of books that other people might do. I know it's kind of a clumsy acronym. The series is called Scribble. I wanted to do calligraphy, lettering, and the sacred, but CLAS, class, well, there's already one of those in the UK, and there's the Carolina Lettering Arts Society. So I thought we can't have a third class. So the acronym is Scribble. And if anyone wants to talk to me about putting something in for the series, I would love to. I'm open to not just people writing about art, but if there's a calligrapher who has sort of explored these themes a lot and wants to do a retro, to put together a book, like a portfolio or a retrospective, I'm very open to that. And there are some artists I've been in conversation with, but nothing that's sort of formal enough that I can name names at the moment. And also, I'm always interested in ideas about Scripsit. The spring issue is going to be on graffiti and street art. And so far, people are excited to hear about that. And I'm excited for the people I've got contributing. So any of these things, you're welcome to drop me a line. I'll put my email in the chat. But in the meantime, I am going to stop sharing my screen and open it up to Q&A. And maybe if we're feeling really cruel, we can even call a Martin. So thank you.
Thank you, Joanna. It was just so interesting, well thought out and articulate. I'm curious to hear how Martin responds. Martin.
Hello, can you hear me?
Yes.
Oh, good. I just pressed my unmute button. Well, first of all, thank you very much. I have often said over a large number of years, the gold standard for anyone like me is when someone looking at my work calls up an idea or a response which is completely different from what I had in mind when I was doing it. Because it means that the thing's got a broader base than it had when I was thinking of it. So you've done that very well, Joanna. Thank you very much. I have to say, I'm very, very pleased and actually very admiring at how observant you all are. A lot of the time you were saying things that I did have in mind, but other people haven't spotted. And some of the time you were saying things that I didn't have in mind that I hadn't spotted. And there's one or two things I would like to say, which you haven't spotted actually either. Particularly with, a small technical thing. I don't know if you noticed, there's a little black blob on quite a lot of things. That is actually a burnt oak leaf shape. It's my brand. It's my sort of craftsman's mark. And it's on all the things I've carved. I don't usually put it on 2D things. But going back to Raise the Stone and You Shall Find Me, and those three, the first one was just all caps. Now, to me, caps either order or announce. and that was oh, thank you. Yeah, great. Oh, great stuff. Thank you, Joanna. Yeah, that's just announcing, isn't it, really? But that was a very long time ago. The second one, where it's in two bits, the back of each piece is exactly as it was ripped off the tree. It wasn't done by a chainsaw. It was just done by the wood being literally torn off. And then I cleaned up the front. And one of your number did get the point, which is that you can only read it when you're in exactly the right place. And that's really very, very important to me. But it's still announcing. Now, the third one, the most recent one, is oh no, sorry, that was the fourth one, wasn't it? The point here was that I realized that the two phrases were actually in two parts. Raise the stone, I'm telling you to do this, and then a bit more gently, and you shall find me. Cleave the wood, I'm telling you to do it again, and there am I. And I love the idea of green roots. That was not in my mind at all. I like iron oxide red and chromium oxide green, and it seemed to me that the emphatic bit of this needed to be red, and the green was gentler. And the other side, the cleave the wood, the texture is actually the chainsaw of the lovely man who gave me the wood. It grew next to his house, but the tree was unsound and it had to be taken down. And he laboriously, it's quite difficult to carve down the grain with a chainsaw. He carved it with the chainsaw, not intending to do any more than cut the branch in half. But when I saw that texture, there was no way I was giving that up. So that's how that arrived. I don't know if there's anything else you particularly want to ask me. I'm very
Oh.
happy to.
So Martin, when you mentioned your brand or your watermark, the image on
Yes,
the left, at the bottom on the right,
that's right. Yes, that's it.
that's it. Okay.
That's
Okay.
it. Yes. Yeah. And then usually on the bottom, I paste a label made of handmade paper with the title, the date, and my signature. And oh, we're having another picture.
Like this.
Yeah. I can't see that. I don't know. I've been not, I can't get the whole screen of pictures. Yes, like that. And I do
Okay.
that.
There you
I
go.
do that with most things. Yeah.
Oh,
If there's anything more I can tell you, please ask.
Martin, it's
Hello.
Margaret speaking.
Hi, Margaret.
Just reminds me of some of the telephone and email conversations we've been having over the last few months.
Yes.
And what you were saying about the difference using partly capital letters, but round capital letters, not the very tall, shouty ones.
Yes.
Then with the more formal but quieter, upright lowercase letters, it's the tone of voice and the level of voice that's emphasized by the difference in letter forms as well as the color. And it just makes me think that you have to encourage people to look at calligraphy on so many different levels.
Yes.
Not just, oh, it's pretty, but what are the words? And not just what are the words saying, it's what was the creator's response to the words, which might be slightly different, perhaps, to what the person who wrote them or wrote them down, in terms of a quotation, was thinking of. And that's where you get these anomalies of meanings. It can be according to how you write it or carve it, the color in which you paint it can influence how the viewer will receive it.
Yeah. absolutely right. And I think this is the direction in which calligraphy is going. It's proceeding in this direction in many different ways. I mean, if you think of something like Hans Joachim Burgert and oh, I'm sorry, my memory for names is terrible. But the very modern, as I think of them, calligraphers, where sometimes the work is almost illegible, they're going in one direction, and some of them say, we want to get the viewer away from the text. I want to get the viewer into
What's
the
the
text.
point then?
Well, I don't know, because I don't do it. I mean, I wouldn't condemn it, but to me, that exactly, I say, what's the point? And the other thing I would say is that, as for being pretty, I mean, actually, to me, the last thing that David Jones's calligraphy is pretty. It isn't pretty, not to me anyway. But it's amazing because he was a genius. And he was a genius with language. And I think it's because there is this terrific concentration on language. If you read particularly his long, very difficult poem, The Anathemata, but the use of language in it is just amazing. And his own, all his own calligraphy, if you're fortunate enough to have a copy of that lovely book about the painted inscriptions of David Jones, it's horribly expensive these days, but if you can get hold of a copy, even just to borrow it, do, and really have a look at it, because he just chose language in a masterful way, really absolutely masterful way. I mean, Welsh, which I speak, Latin, which I don't, and English, of course, but terrific. And I think this is one of the reasons why he's completely outstanding, and nobody actually comes very close to him. I can't think of anybody else in the 20th century who actually comes really within touching distance of David Jones. I think there will become people, they'll be much cleverer than I am, but it will happen. It's going to develop, because that's the way we're developing, I think.
I would add my own, what I'm looking at now and working with for the graffiti issue. It's interesting how many of the graffiti writers are saying very similar things. Like, it's not about legibility, it's about making a style and an aesthetic. And when I show the St. John's Bible, I would often turn the page upside down to short circuit the part of your brain that's decoding the language, and just ask people to look at the shapes, or show them, Arabic, Hebrew, Chinese calligraphy. Most people I talk to don't know those languages. And so then they can really just only look at the shapes, and then maybe bring that mentality back to Roman alphabet.
That's kind of what I meant about looking at it on different levels. It's not just the words, it's the shapes and the textures and the dynamism or calmness of the marks that are then contributing to the whole. What does the whole say to you? And then examine the parts, and that's when it becomes much more interesting and multi-dimensional. It's not just a piece of pretty lettering, which is so superficial. I mean, I'm not decrying the quality of formal lettering, far be it from me, because that's where I started from. But it's what else you can do, because it's not typesetting, which was what you were saying in the very beginning, Joanna. And I loved that you described it as going down a rabbit hole, which will lead you into this sort of labyrinth of ideas that is quite difficult to find your way around, but is fascinating in the process. And there's so much more to creation of things by hand than just putting metal, or, well, that was the old days of setting metal, or setting, well, believe me, I've been there and done that, but people still do it now, and they can do it very expressively.
Yeah.
So, you can't just say calligraphy has to be one-dimensional. It's full of dimensions, more than 7.
I think another thing which I have written about one or two places is the fact that we have a difficulty with lettering art in the sense that we're asking people to do two things at once. We're asking them to scan in a non-time way an image, and then we're asking them to read words in a temporal sequence. And we haven't yet, I don't think anybody yet has solved that one. It's a bit like Wittgenstein's duck and rabbit drawing. You can see it as a duck, you can see it as a rabbit, but you can't see it both at the same time. But in a way, this is actually what we're asking people to do with lettering art. And we haven't reached the point yet where at least very many people, I can't do it, very many people can do it, if any.
I was going to say, if any.
Yeah, it's yeah.
I can't read.
Yeah.
Well,
Sorry, I really appreciate you being here, Martin. But I do want to when for the rest of Q&A, can we do hand raising just so it doesn't become total chaos?
Okay. Nobody's hand goes up. Ha ha.
That's the fear.
Well, actually, are there any more questions? Any more discussion? Because we're now.
Okay, I see Rick Paulus is.
Yeah,
Rick
this is
Paulus is
one
raising
line
his actual hand.
Can't find the place to. I can't find the place to raise my hand. I'm so sorry. It was wonderful to hear you two have that past conversation for the few minutes, because Margaret, you just I couldn't have articulated it like that, what I see in Martin's work. And Martin, I have been a fan of your work for over 10 years. And a big part of it, well, to get into everything that you two just discussed, but your beach combing, I live on the North Atlantic on Cape Cod on a sandbar. And I can't tell you how many miles I've walked and seen beautiful wood to take home and carve. And you do it and I don't. And I applaud you for that. And it comes through in your work, that your connection to the materials and how you work with it. It's just great.
Well, I'm glad you mentioned that, because, by the way, my wife, you can't see it because my screen's black. My wife is standing here whispering in my ear. I hope you're telling them how much I support you, she says. So, which is true, she does. I could, as she says, you couldn't do it if you had to wash your own socks, is what she says.
Right.
But no, going back to finding things on the beach. Two observations. One is that I'm very material led. I mean, some people I think are words led. Some people are kind of lettering and decorative effect led. I'm much more, most of the time, I'm much more material led. I get a piece of wood and I think, what can this piece of wood say? And have I time, Joanna, have I time for a small anecdote? It's
Yeah.
A little bit for me to say no to you.
Yes, yes. Please go ahead.
Long time ago, I wrote an article in a certain calligraphy journal. I'm not going to tell you which one. And somebody, a very senior calligrapher, really went to town on this article because I was talking about having a conversation with a piece of wood. And she was saying, this is ridiculous. You can't have a conversation with a piece of wood. And she actually phoned me up to ask to carry on this discussion. And so she said, well, what are you carving at the moment? And I said, well, actually, I'm carving a couple of lines from a motet by William Byrd, the Elizabethan composer. In English, it is, the souls of the righteous are in the hands of God, and there shall no evil touch them. Eustorum anime is the famous motet. And there was this long, long silence at the end of the phone. I thought, oh, I've done it now. I have really torn it apart. This is going to echo down the years. And then she very, very quietly said, you do hit below the belt, don't you? And from then on, we were very good friends.
I think I know the journal you mean, Martin.
I'm sorry?
Which
I
journal?
think I know the journal you mean.
I think you probably know the calligrapher I mean as well.
I
but
think I
this
do.
Boy.
is-
All right.
this is
Well,
this is a very British affair, I'm afraid. I think
Sorry.
remember, if any calligraphy gossip comes up, remember this is going on YouTube. So
Chris, my wife wants to say something about graffiti.
Graffiti. I used to teach in a young offenders prison, and they always talked about graffiti, and we got a book with graffiti in, and they absolutely loved it, you see. But when they were in prison, they couldn't do it. But when they were out, they absolutely loved it, you see. And I said to them one day, well, where do you get the cans of paint from, all the paint you use? And they laughed and they said, oh, miss, we nick them.
Nick
Which is
being
why
English
Steal them,
English
steal them.
slang for steel. Yeah,
Steal them.
yeah. Oh dear, yeah.
Couldn't help but laugh,
No,
really.
No. The other thing I have to say about calligraphy on your side of the Atlantic, I do have an enormous admiration for your sign painters. They are just incredible. I got this. Our son Matty got me a book about American sign painters that he saw when he was over there on a job, and they are fantastic. It's not what I want to do, but the skill level is just awesome. It really is. Sorry, Rick, was your hand up?
No, I actually hit the applaud. Here's to what you just said.
Right.
I found out where the hands are, and I found the clap one, and that was,
Yeah.
American sign painters, great thing.
Oh yeah, fantastic. And
other comments, questions, rants, diatribes, responses.
diatribes. That's what we want, a diatribe. That'd be good.
Yes.
Or gossip.
Again, this is going on YouTube.
Be careful what you say.
Yes. Be careful what you wish for. Yes.
Mhm.
Well,
I did put a question in the question, but I forgot to put question marks before it. So it was, I just was curious about the title toccata for a couple of people.
Oh, yes. Well, yes. A toccata. You know the musical meaning of the word. Well, it's exactly that. It was the toccata was so that the organist could try out the organ, so that before he played the main piece, he played a short piece, which enabled him, or usually him, to try the different keys, the different stops, get the feel of the instrument, and then he would launch. So Bach would play a toccata, and then he would launch into one of his big fugues. So all 40 of these pieces, which were very early on in my lettering progress, they were touch pieces. I was seeing what I could do with the wood and with the tools, and quite often having to buy another tool to do what I wanted to do. That's why toccata.
Hmm.
Yeah.
So someone at the chat where we can see more of Martin. If you go to the Goldmark Gallery, If you go to the Goldmark Gallery webpage, there's some pieces for sale. There's this new book, The Art of Layer Carving in Wood. There's the catalogs from the exhibits he's done. These are from Goldmark. And then if any of you subscribe to the Edge from the Calligraphy and Lettering Arts Society in the UK, the August 2022 issue has an interview with him. Or, you could ask him if he has room for a house guest. That's not on me. I'm happy if anybody has questions for me as well.
If one wanted to buy your books, Joanna, how do they do that?
Well, the first two are liturgical press. So if you buy from the publisher's website, more money goes to the publisher instead of Jeff Bezos, but of course they're available on Amazon.
Hmm.
And the second one, Ewan Clayton wrote, I got him to write the foreword. That was the part I was more proud of than anything I wrote.
Yeah, that was a good move.
I'm a big fan of his.
Yeah. He has a lot of fans.
And I'm, of course, drop me a line if anybody has any comments or thoughts on any of the other projects they mentioned. But it looks like the Q&A is winding down. Is that fair to say, Evelyn?
Patricia Dressler.
Oh wait, Patricia and then Dina.
Unmute yourself, Patricia.
Okay.
Hi. I'm sure you have knowledge of this, but I just was in Miami and they have a graffiti museum and they have a patron started all of this, and there are blocks and blocks and blocks in this one neighborhood of some of the most amazing graffiti. And he commissioned graffiti artists from all over the world to come, as well as the local taggers. So I was just blown away, and you could spend a couple of days looking at it if anybody has a chance to go there.
Do they post them on a website?
You're muted, Patricia.
Yeah.
I'm sure they must have something. It's a very professional organization that is sort of in charge of this. And they have outdoor galleries as well as 3 indoor galleries, as well as subsidizing and encouraging people to write on their old warehouses that this one man basically bought a huge neighborhood and started this graffiti project. And he's passed away, and his daughter is in charge of the institute or nonprofit or whatever they are. But it's really really amazing and worth a visit.
I thank you very much. I can try and pursue it.
I just put a link to the graffiti museum in the chat.
I just want to convey, when I say a rabbit hole, these are some of the graffiti and lettering books that I've stumbled into in the course of, right? It's endless. And, some of them are more lettering focused and some of them are not, but you have to join the Washington Calligraphers Guild and get the spring script set if you want to know more.
I've lost you all again now. It's got you've gone off. I don't know where you are.
I did see Dina Shunra had her hand up.
Yep. Yes, something you said, Joanna, at the very beginning of your talk was an incredible teaser about Ben Shahn. I am fascinated with Ben Shahn's lettering, particularly the political focus on the Hebrew diasporic writing, which may feel niche for everybody else, but for me, it's a big tube of my whole world. So I'm curious if you have something you can point to me at that you are working on, or perhaps to untease what you said.
Put my foot in my mouth there. So the short version is, I would like to write a book down the road about Ben Shahn's Hebrew lettering. I know his Roman alphabet stuff. There are a lot of calligraphers who really played with it and worked with it. Carol Dubosh, who I saw in here earlier, definitely is a Ben Shahn fan. I haven't seen his Hebrew lettering get as much appreciation, but I love his work. I love the political part of his work. He was very social justice oriented. And the art historians who write about him, they write about his photography, they write about his New Deal art, his painting, and then the specifically more Hebraic Jewish stuff that has a lot of calligraphy that he did toward the later part of his career, especially in the 60s, doesn't really get as much attention, or it's just written about as sort of reflection of identity rather than really looked at as interesting art. So that's a sort of down the road thing. But I'm a big fan of him. And of course, he's not living, but archives of his papers and things are around. So that's
Writing
another
his writing
down the road.
is. Thank you. I will be stalking your website in order to see when you do that.
Dina,
Oh, well,
Dina,
Yes,
have you, I assume you've got his Love and Joy About Letters, have you? That wonderful book.
that is the single thing I inherited from my father, who
Oh, wonderful.
bought it contemporaneously and ignited a huge fascination for me that way.
Yeah, it's a wonderful book. Yeah, I've just given it
Yeah,
away.
for me, the shape of content also, that's helped me in how I look at lettering as well. The way he talks about the form and the content and how they interrelate. So that's another rabbit hole for another day.
Yeah.
And of course, that leads to the Diego Rivera rabbit hole, which is enormous and wonderful and connects exactly to what he's doing.
Yeah.
Well, you know, when I was a kid, I was like 10, and I was at my grandma's for the summer, and I went to her one day and I said, "Grandma, I'm bored." And she said, "Only boring people get bored." And she was right. So I think many of us in this room suffer from maybe not being boring. Being our mind is less boring than our physical capacity to do things in a day.
Definitely in my
I
case.
think we can identify with that, right?
Yeah. Yeah.
I now, as I teach my undergrads, I tell them that on the first day. So very few of you will major in religious studies, but you know, you graduate from college, you have ideas in your head, and you will be less bored the rest of your life. That's the hope.
Yeah. Can I say just before I don't know when we're going to finish, but just in case I get clipped off at the end, thank you so much for participating. I'm really sorry my camera didn't work. I mean, not that I'm any oil painting for you to watch, but it would have been perhaps nice if we could have both had mutual recognition. But if any of you, would this be all right to say if any of you want to email me?
Of course.
Okay. Do you want my email address?
Yes.
Okay. It's very, very simple. All lowercase, Martin, Martin, W, Wenham, Wenham. So there's two W's in the middle. If you send it with only one W in the middle, it goes to somebody in the Midlands of England who pierces his parts of his body you don't want to mention and then exposes them on YouTube. So so don't forget the W, the extra W at gmail.com.
Okay, I've put it in the chat.
Yeah.
And if everybody, you can save the chat. At the bottom of the chat, when you click on the chat icon, at the bottom of the window are 3 ellipses. If you click on that, there's a
chat.
Oh.
There's a menu item that says save chat, and it saves a text file to your hard drive.
Oh gosh.
And it usually goes into a folder called Zoom.
That sounds alarming.
Yeah.
Right. Anyway, thank you so much. It's been wonderful to meet you all. Great.
Really, thank you, Martin.
Me too.
And Chris is here. You can't see her.
See everybody.
She's prettier than I am, which is just as well.
Thank you so much, Martin and Chris. And Evelyn, I think this is probably a good time to wrap up. I feel like an hour and a half is like Zoom attention span.
I would like to thank Joanna and Martin for a truly engaging and interesting lecture. To everybody who registered, you will be getting an email with a link to the recording. The recording will also be available on the Friends of Calligraphy website for an indefinite period of time.
And yeah, thank you all for coming. And I also especially want to thank Sarah Loesch-Frank, who was my first calligraphy teacher, who's here, and Rick
Give us a wave,
Paulus
Sarah.
for my first calligraphy workshop was with Rick Paulus. So, you know, when I was young and reckless, apparently a teenager, according to Evelyn. I was like 27 when you met me. So
No, that can't be possible.
I just look young.
I think you were 10.
Oh, at 10, I looked 5. Anyway, thank you so much. And if there's any, I'll stay on if anyone has other questions or wants to chat. But otherwise, I think we're
I
wrapping
think
up.
that we are going to end. And Nancy, I think you can end the recording.
I did just end the recording and we're going to end the meeting, but I would like the lecture committee to stay on briefly afterwards. And the rest of you, we will see you at our next lecture, which before we hang up, Evelyn, when is the next lecture again? And who?
We don't know yet who it is, but it's.
I think we do. Excuse me. I think isn't that cause?
Oh yes, thank
In
you,
March.
Meredith.
Oh, really?
Yes.
Oh, well.
Wow.
Kaz. Yeah.
Yeah.
And with the
So that-
gigantic brushes, among other
Mhm.
things. Yeah.
It would be March 13th. How splendid. I
Thank
shall
you
be
so
there.
much for remembering.
Thank
Yeah.
you, Meredith, for reminding us. Okay, so we're going to ask everyone to log off and the lecture committee to stay on briefly. Thank you.
Okay.
Nancy, do you need me to stay?
Do we know?
Yes, please.
Okay.
No, Margaret Morgan.
Can I have one moment? I need to run the bathroom. I'll be right back.
Okay, take your time.
Nancy, are you sure the recording is stopped? I see that it's still running.
Oh, thank you. Stop. What is going on here?